Good evening, Your Life with Faye. Thank you for joining us. Every evening at 8 o'clock, we take a look at what is most important in the country. Today, it's our economy. Now, I know there are a lot of things going on in the country and some terrible news that has emerged in the last 24 hours. Not the least of which is the fact that former finance minister and president of the country, Pranab Mukherjee, has just passed away. Our condolences to his family and all of his colleagues and his former colleagues who will, of course, miss him. In other bad news, India is reporting, like I said yesterday, over 80,000 COVID cases a day. That's the highest any country anywhere in the world since the outbreak began has ever reported. So it's really a race to the bottom right now as far as India's COVID numbers are concerned. Apart from that, we understand that last night there was much more than a skirmish where China has sort of flexed its muscles again in Ladakh near the Pangong Lake, and we'll bring you an analysis of that tomorrow at this time. So matters remain very, very sensitive in Ladakh. We understand also that the Srinagar-Leh highway is now closed for civilians and only military vehicles are operating on that highway. We'll give you an understanding of the severity of the situation there. But what we're going to talk about this evening is the economy, and I'll tell you why. India began measuring GDP and GDP growth on a quarterly basis back in 1996. Never in the history of these numbers being measured has India ever recorded negative growth of GDP. Now, because of COVID and the fact that our economy was already ailing before COVID happened, we were expecting numbers to be negative for this quarter, which is the quarter one of this year. So that's April, May, June. We were expecting it to be negative, 5, 10%, 15%, 12%, but 23.9%. 23.9% is a quarter of our economy. And that is a shocking, shocking number. We are officially in a recession. And this chart actually gives you a clear idea of what we're talking about. And I just want you to think back, viewers, to a point in 2014 when this government was in election and everyone was talking about double-digit growth. We've forgotten that. We talked about double-digit growth a lot, saying, hey, you know what? We want to grow at 10%. 10% didn't happen. What happened was instead 8% became 7, 7 became 6. We went up to 8.2 midway. Interestingly, in the demonetization year, according to the government, and we'll see that it sort of fell down further and further, that it came down to 3%, and boom, that yellow bar that you're looking at right now, 23.9%, minus 23.9%. And some of the details of this was very, very worrying. The fact that while all of the sectors were in negative growth, and people will argue that obviously there was a lockdown, nobody was working, so nobody was producing anything, because GDP is a measure of how much we have produced, whether it is a service or we've manufactured something or we've created something. How much have we produced? So agriculture, services and manufacturing, all of these sectors together, how much have we produced? So if nobody was working, obviously nobody was producing anything. But the number that has really shocked a lot of the experts is the breakup sector-wise and the show that the public administration, so this is the money that government spends. Now you'll see, this is from CNBC TV 18. You'll see mining has gone down 23%, power, gas, construction, finance, real estate. But the number in the middle, public administration, is down 10% as well. Now, a lot of people who are making an estimate of what this number would look like expected it to have gone up 10%, because in a bad economy like this, one expects that the government will spend more money in order to jumpstart the economy. But what the government has done is the exact opposite. And that has actually caused a lot of people to be very worried. Lots of creased eyebrows among the economists in our country right now. Couple of questions that we're going to ask today. We've got a great panel. Are we just as bad as everybody else? Is this what's happening across the world? Because COVID happened to everybody. So is this in line with everybody else? That's question number one. Question number two, yes, there was a lockdown. Now the lockdown is open. Does it mean we'll just go back? Was this a flash in the pan? Is it a one-off? Will we recover now that factories have opened and offices are going to start functioning? That's question number two. And question number three is obviously, will this mean we're going to lose more jobs? What does this mean for you and me in our houses? What does this mean for our jobs, for our spending, for our school fees, for our rent, for food? things like that. How bad is this going to be? So is this in line with the rest of the world? Will we recover now that the lockdown is open? And what does it mean for you and me personally? These are the questions that we're asking this evening. And to help us answer those questions, Mohan Guruswamy, who is the advisor to Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha, joins us right now. So does Santosh Mehrotra, as an economist, Professor Jayati Ghosh, who teaches economics at JNU, and Brinda Jagirdar will also join us a little further down in that conversation as well. I want to welcome you. Thank you for giving us time. You're very generous with your time. Professor Ghosh, I know you have to leave quickly, so I'm going to ask you this question first. Are we in line with the rest of the world? Because from what I understand, the UK is down about 20% as well. The US is down 9%. Japan is down 7.6%. Is everyone suffering? And is this, are we in any way different from the rest of the world?
Well, everyone is suffering, but we have among the worst performance. If you look at the G20 countries, ours is the worst performance. If you look at other South Asia, ours is the worst performance. And remarkably, we're also the worst performing in terms of the disease. So it's all of these. But I want to actually add to the depression, if I can, Faye, because, this 24% sounds disastrous and terrible, but it's actually an underestimate. It still measures essentially the formal sector. And we know that unorganized activity, informal sector, has been the worst hit. So in fact, the likely actual decline is when the numbers are revised a year down the line, you're going to find that it was an even deeper decline. So that's the first point. We are much, much worse than everybody else, but even this terrible 24% number that you're seeing is an underestimate. The likely number is even worse. The second point I want to make is that if you look at that sectoral disaggregation, what's so terrifying is that the most adversely affected, even in this formal sector part, are the most employment intensive sectors. Construction has fallen by half, okay, over this period. Trade, hotels, transport, etc., 47% decline. Manufacturing, 40% decline, 39%, which comes to the same thing. And as you mentioned, alarmingly, the government, which should have been dramatically increasing its spending, and which every other economy we've seen, public sector spending has increased dramatically by 10, 20% of GDP. In Japan, as much as 24% of GDP. In every other economy, public sector is increasing. Here, we are declining. And this is, as some of us had feared earlier, that first of all, the central government is depriving the states of money at a time when they are the ones doing all the heavy lifting for the pandemic and the economic consequences of it. And secondly, they themselves have been telling other ministries, now tighten your belts, do not spend because we have to spend for the pandemic. And of course, as we've seen, the pandemic relief has been so niggardly, so minor that it is absolutely meaningless. What does this mean in terms of the implications? Well, they are so bad that I really don't want to tell you because they are much, much worse than you can imagine. We haven't seen the beginning of the decline yet. Yes, we have seen a decline. Clearly, this is something that is going to extend well beyond any easing of restrictions. It is not restriction related. It is due to the fact that you dealt a body blow to the economy through an incredibly stupid, badly designed, poorly planned lockdown at a time when you didn't need to do a whole national lockdown. And then you didn't provide any compensation. You didn't give anyone livelihood support. You provided no social protection. So demand has plummeted. Everyone keeps saying the only hope is agriculture because we had a good monsoon and we had a good rabi harvest, but there's nobody ready to buy the product. So the prices will not rise of these very much. So even farmers are not going to really be able to pull the economy out of this. We need a dramatic change in strategy.
Professor, are you arguing that this is not the hand or act of God?
Of course not. Very clearly. I mean, whatever God there is presumably affected the entire world, right? What we have done is managed to make what was already a bad situation infinitely worse by complete incompetence and mismanagement. I mean, this is the hand of God only if you see Mr. Modi as God.
Well, oh God.
Exactly.
I'm referring to a non-human one. Mohan Guruswamy is, Should we look to God at this point? Because I'm worried about the fact that Professor Ghosh is telling us that the decline has not begun. That for me was the scariest bit that she said, because this means that what we're looking, what are we going to drop by another 50%? Well, what does this mean? The decline has not yet begun.
You're absolutely right. The decline hasn't begun. The decline is, a very gentle decline, considering that the government did zilch for the last 6 months, did nothing. And the decline next quarter is going to be horrendous. You don't know what's happening in the countryside. Nobody has jobs. Outside, nobody has jobs. Graduates are doing daily labor. Today, I had hired a guy to assist a mason, and he was a college graduate. You come to that situation. Beggared 110 million people who lost their daily jobs. And the government hasn't done a thing. This is a question of mindset. You've spent allotted 65,000 rupees for stimulus, 65,000 crores. When everybody, even the most conservative of the Keynesians, have been talking about 10 lakh crores. And you've got a mindset here that spending money, that borrowing money or cutting other expenditures and using it on people is bad. There's a mindset problem here. And the only well-known economist who said that, who gave a support for a 65,000 crore stimulus was Raghuram Rajan, who comes from Chicago. But all the people elsewhere, all the Keynes people who say that you must pump prime the economy, have disagreed with that. 10, 15 lakh crores is what everybody's talking about. And these guys have done nothing. And, I'll make a small correction. On public administration, the costs have actually gone up by 16 billion. It's not come down.
What does that mean?
It means only the growth slowed down because, two DA tranches were not given. Increases were not given. But expenditure is there. You may not have actually paid the money this quarter, but you'll have to pay it next quarter. Nobody's been let go. You have not imposed a wage cut on them. They account for 12-13% of GDP. Nothing has been done. And
so for example, Mr. Guruswamy, Bharat Kawal has asked a question. He says, Professor Ghosh said demand has plummeted even in agriculture. Does this mean people are not buying as much food as they used to?
Yes, because they cannot afford to.
There's no money.
These are people who've lost their livelihoods. They got no income for 2 or 3 months. Now they're getting maybe a fraction of their former wage. They cannot afford to buy the kind of food they bought earlier. There are children going hungry. There are people who are not drinking milk. There are people who are having 2 meals a day instead of 3, or even 1 meal a day. We have really got to a situation where I would say this is the worst economic crisis since independence. And we are back to levels that we saw in the 50s and 60s in terms of the absolute poverty.
Do you agree, Mr. Guruswamy? Worst since independence?
Absolutely. I don't think, we've ever seen a time like this. And, you're seeing a time with an inert government being beset by problems. The Chinese have crossed the Pangong. And from what I hear today, that there are some Chinese troops on the south bank of the Pangong. And the government is oblivious to it, not reacting. You got, in another month, I was calculating, doing the numbers, we will cross the United States in number of COVID patients or COVID infections. The only reason is our mortality rate is low because, our old age cohort, the 65 cohort is small.
Well, let me just bring in Santosh Mehrotra as well. Professor Mehrotra, is this, in your opinion, also, we're going to see, obviously, people starve. Is this going to be worse than 1965 when we had droughts, when we had, problems of in India that had just come out, into independence? Do you actually believe it's going to be that bad? And if you just put it into perspective for my audience, because these numbers seem alien to us, right? It's not something that we keep on our dinner table. What would this mean for us in our homes? How is this relevant to the people who are watching right now? What's going to happen to us now?
Well, what's going to happen is that more people are going to lose jobs, and they will very soon begin to lose hope. You see, in 3 months, people don't lose hope. Now, what will happen if the economy sinks further, as we are all agreed it will, then people will begin to lose hope. We're already seeing an increase in the number of suicides. There are young people who are committing suicide. So what it will mean is that A, hunger will increase, so child malnutrition will increase, and uh, and what will happen is increasingly that more and more people will be pushed into poverty, and because wages in rural areas would have fallen, people will come back to urban areas partly looking for work, and of course not finding it, then we will have more beggars on the streets. So it will be visible. You asked the question, is it as bad as in 65, 66, 67? It's it's going to be much worse. It's of course it wasn't. We have to understand that we have the food in the granaries, uh, sitting in silos, which needs to go out into the market or through the PDS. But so in other words, we have our granaries full. Uh, so to that extent, it's different. But other than that, everything else is going to be much, much worse, much, much worse. And I agree with the other two panelists that this is far and away the worst economic crisis in the history of our country post-independence, one. And two, the point is that we have done much worse than the other G20 countries, much worse, much worse. And we can't afford to, because our scale of poverty is so much greater. Our inequality is so much worse. I mean, if you just look, you read out the numbers for the other countries. I mean, every time you are in a debate on television, the ruling party people tell you, but it's everywhere it's happening. In other words, every economy is shrinking. But why are we shrinking the worst? We are shrinking the worst because we grossly mismanaged first the lockdown, then the unlock, and the economy. So we are in the worst of all worlds. I mean, I couldn't agree more with both Jayati as well as Mr. Guruswamy.
You know,
So,
when you
yes.
have loss of purchasing power of consumption, it also is a famine. You could have your granaries, and it's the official definition these days, that you create famine relief works so that people have money in their hands to buy food. It was there in the British manuals that either there's a food shortage or loss of jobs. If there's loss of jobs, you create jobs. Or that means put money in people's hands. The fellow should read the famine manual.
There are some interesting questions that are coming in. I'm going to read some of them out. Dipanshu Bhaskar says, Pakodi ki dukhan khol do, it will help me. I'm an unemployed computer science engineer. Bharat Raval says, will the IT sector new job hires also be impacted? I'm assuming yes. Isn't there a committee that can take over the damage control from the government? Rohit Rao, and this is a good question. What are the first three things our government should do in order to turn the tide? Now, Rohit, I think we have to first come to terms with the fact that turning the tide is not as simple as one makes it seem. What we're looking now is to stem the bleeding and to do damage control, if I'm not mistaken. I'll take this question to the panel. Professor Ghosh, what does the government need to do? Should we be looking at damage control here to stop the bleeding, or is it possible to recover from where we are?
Yes, I think it is possible to recover. In fact, what is so frustrating about this current moment is that this is not necessary. We didn't have to be in this terrible situation. We could have immediately done things to protect the poor and to make sure that effective demand doesn't collapse the way it has. So even now we can do it. We can, for example, I mean, if you mentioned three things or maybe five things, we can immediately make sure that food reaches 10 kilograms per household, reaches everybody. Universalize the public distribution system. Do not insist that only those who have the ration cards have access. Give it to everybody. 10 kilograms free to every household that wants it. And let's assume that 80% of the households take it. That's number one. Number two, immediately double the work that you're providing under the employment guarantee in rural areas. At the moment, many states are running out of the 100 days limit for the households. Double that immediately. You can do that without a change in the law, and begin an urban employment guarantee. There are many templates around. 2 states have already started it. There are many proposals about how this can be done. An urban employment guarantee, that's the second step. The third step is, for God's sake, this nonsense about moratorium, all that does is kick the can down the road and make that can larger. Right now, from tomorrow, that moratorium is over. When the EMIs hit the middle classes, and these are EMIs that have collected over 3 months, you can imagine what will happen, because these are people who have now lost jobs or lost income in this period. Extend this and do not make it a moratorium. Make it, I'm so sorry, do not make this a moratorium, do not make this a moratorium, make it a standstill. That is, get rid of all the interest rates. Do not deal with the interest
But you know, Professor, I got an email from my bank, and I'll tell you, I have a credit card with Axis Bank, and they have revised all their charges upwards. So every charge has been moved upwards by a couple of hundred rupees. And you know, I must warn our audience, credit cards you swipe, you don't realize you're being charged for a lot of these things. So I personally, and this is the fear, right? So I personally have decided, and I pay my credit card in full every month, I decided to put the card away and not use it anymore. Now, where does this leave banks? If they're not going to do any business and they're going to keep trying to make, you know, scramble money like this, our banks are going to begin collapsing one by one. Or is that an overestimate?
Well, certainly there is a real fear, but this is going to happen if you let the real economy go under like this. It's not just, you know, you and me, it's small businesses, it's people who've taken student loans. I mean, nobody is going to be able to repay. And so you will have more and more of this, the more you let the real economy go under, which is why I'm suggesting our actions have to be directed to the real economy. Computer scientists will not get jobs if there are no jobs at the lower levels. So
Yes. And you know, we're getting a lot of messages from young people. We have a message here from Anita Davis who says, you know, what do you think should be done with this sleeping government? I'm 25. I'm worried about the future. I'm guessing others are as well. That is true. There are a lot of people graduating from college this year who are not going to get jobs. You're not going to get jobs because there aren't enough jobs to be had. You'll be competing with someone in their 40s who has 15 years experience. And that's going to be a challenge. I want to share this Hindu Business Line article that's come out actually just a couple of hours ago. Finance Minister to meet bank chiefs to review schemes under Atmanirbhar Bharat package. Now, they're reviewing, remember that 20 lakh crore rupee package that was announced a couple of months ago? They're doing a review of that package. And it just, for me, seems like a sluggish response to an emergency. You know, what should be emergency response is actually very sluggish response. Mr. Guruswamy, what is your response to the fact
So, Faye, I will have to leave right in another minute. So I'll just make one point and I will leave. I just want to highlight, you know, this Atmanirbhar was very, very heavily based on credit. Credit has gone down to every segment of the economy except big business. Only big companies have got more credit. Everybody else, credit has gone down. So Atmanirbhar has not worked at all. And on which sorry note, I'm afraid I have to leave you. None of this is necessary. It can be changed if the government would listen to reason.
Thank you, Professor, for joining us. Mr. Guruswamy, do you believe that this action that the government is taking by reviewing the Atmanirbhar Bharat package is the action that's needed right now?
It's just, you know, trying to grab a little space in the newspapers and on TV channels that the government is doing something. The reality is, you know, show me the money. Where is the money? You mark the money. That is only what will convince people and move the economy. When you're saying that I'm going to make these investments, you know, create these jobs, create this consumption, then the economy will move. You can have these meetings over all kinds of inconsequential things. Like let's make toys and let's make this and let's make that. But not going to amount to very much. It's like playing with peacocks. Passing away, whiling away time. So, I think they don't have a clue. That is the problem. These people, either the lack of education shows or the lack of experience shows.
Right. I'm just going to take the next question to Professor Mehrotra. Again, I'm going to ask you if you would please answer in Hindi to allow more of our audience members to understand it. Ritev Avasthi says, has there been any effect from the so-called economic stimulus packages that our government has announced in the last 12 months? And the question about young people graduating from computer science engineers, graduating from college without jobs. Do you believe that there's going to be any improvement or is it going to get worse? If you would please answer in Hindi.
बहुत आसान है जवाब दोनों सवालों का। पहले दूसरे सवाल का जवाब दे देता हूं मैं कि स्थिति और गंभीर होती चली जाएगी। और स्थिति इसलिए गंभीर होगी क्योंकि जो आत्मनिर्भर भारत का और लेट अस बिकम वोकल फॉर लोकल इत्यादि जो नारे लगाए गए हैं, नारों से इकोनॉमी चल नहीं पड़ती है। बड़ी सीधी सी बात ये है, आप टिकटॉक बैन कर दीजिए, इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि आप रोज़ जो एलईडी बल्ब खरीद रहे हैं वो चीन से आना बंद हो गया है। बड़ी सीधी सी बात ये है कि नौकरियां अभी और घटने वाली हैं, ख़ासतौर से ऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर में, संगठित क्षेत्र में, और घटेंगी। असंगठित क्षेत्र का तो अभी क्योंकि पूरी अर्थव्यवस्था डगमगाएगी और इससे ज़्यादा आगे चलते हुए, तो क्योंकि संगठित क्षेत्र डगमगाएगा और उसमें आमदनियां कम होंगी, नौकरियां कम होंगी, तो उससे उसका असर होगा असंगठित क्षेत्र पे। पहला सवाल क्या था? कैन यू जस्ट रिपीट दैट? व्हाट इज द फर्स्ट?
प्रोफेसर साहब, जो बच्चे अभी ग्रेजुएट करके नौकरियां ढूंढने लगे हैं, तो उनका क्या हाल है?
देखिए, बड़ी सीधी सी बात है, जो अभी ग्रेजुएट कर रहे हैं उनको उम्मीद कम ही करनी चाहिए कि उनको नौकरियां मिलेंगी। उनको मैं तो करीब 3 महीने से आपके कार्यक्रम पे ये कह रहा हूँ कि जितने बच्चे सारे ग्रेजुएट इस समय कर रहे हैं उनको अपने को नए कोर्सेज में एनरोल करना चाहिए, उनको अपने को अपस्किल करना चाहिए, उनको ये देखना चाहिए कि उनकी क्या कमज़ोरी है, उनको ये स्टडी करना चाहिए कि किस सेक्टर में नौकरियां बढ़ने की संभावना है। तो ई कॉमर्स में नौकरियां बढ़ने की संभावना है। तो अब ई कॉमर्स में हर आदमी दौड़ करके भाग करके अप्लाई करने की कोशिश करेगा तो उसमें भी गलत होगा और नौकरियां नहीं मिलेंगी। तो देखिए, क्योंकि नौकरियां मिलने की संभावना कम है, होती चली जाएगी, आगे होता है कि ये मैं कई महीनों से कह रहा हूँ, स्थिति और गंभीर होगी। इसलिए मैं दोहराऊंगा कि आपको अपने जो कौशल है उसको और अपग्रेड करिए, जो भी आप पढ़ सकते हैं और नई डिग्री प्राप्त कर सकते हैं प्राप्त करिए, और कोई इलाज लग नहीं रहा है हमें।
जरा इसमें मैं एक बात और जोड़ूं कि आपको एक अवसर मिला है दूसरे लोगों को जागरूक करने के लिए कि व्यवस्था में क्या दिक्कत है, व्यवस्था क्यों बदलती नहीं, इसके बारे में भी सब सोचिए, समझाइए लोगों को। एक मौका मिला है, तुरंत नौकरी में जाने के बजाय एक समय मिल रही है, इसको उपयोग कीजिए देश को बनाने में।
कैसे मोहन साहब, कैसे?
अभी तो लोगों को बताइए कि क्या हो रहा है, लोगों को बताइए कि कितने लोग बेरोजगार हो गए, व्यवस्था क्या कर रही है, सरकारी मुलाजिम की तनख्वाह कम नहीं होती है, और खेल कूद जो है दिल्ली में जो हो रहा है वो होते जाता है, हर एक रोज एक नया तमाशा है। और ये आज देखिए फे वो मन की बात पे लाइक्स एंड डिसलाइक्स पे, इनको लाइक्स मिले 1.5 लाख और डिसलाइक्स मिले 7 लाख। शायद पहली बार इनको ये अनुभव हुआ कि डिसलाइक का मतलब क्या है।
So there are a couple of other questions if I may bring in.
मोहन जानते हैं अब क्या होगा? अब ये मन की बात भी खत्म हो जाएगी। अब अगले हफ्ते मन की बात नहीं होगी, या अगले महीने।
So there are a lot of questions coming in. Vishesh Chopra says, is there any way to hold the government accountable for this mismanagement? What about the PM Cares Fund? What is it being used for now? The PM Cares Fund has zero, transparency in it. We don't know how much money is in it. We don't know what it's being used for because it's not considered a government fund. So it's not something that comes under the RTI according to the Prime Minister's office. So we don't know. The question about PM CARES Fund, the answer is we don't know. And that's really, I mean, we know more about Riya Chakrabarti's personal chats to her friends than we do about the PM CARES Fund. Let that sink in and consider the reality of where we're living. But is there a way to hold the government accountable? We can answer that question. Mr. Guruswamy, you were part of government at one point. Is there accountability?
Unfortunately, in our system, which we've got, we don't have a positive feedback system. That is, the state only reacts when it is punched. All over the country, when people come out on the streets and demand, the state reacts. The state has to be made to feel the pain first. That is unfortunate. Things are so obvious, but the state is not reacting. You're having meetings after meetings. This other finance whiz in the government says that every hotel must have Kolhapuri chappals. This is the suggestion the guy is giving in a time of crisis like this. That will revive the traditional crafts industry in this country. Kolhapuri chappals. Somebody else is talking about something else. But talk about something which will employ people in the millions. This is like telling people to go and fry pakoras.
Yeah. So the Kolhapuri chappals are the pakoras of 2020. Another question that's coming from a name that I cannot read because it says, do not sell your craft. How is our GDP decline different from the USA's 33% decline? Is it more problematic? If we put up that chart one more time, the Business Today put out, I believe US in this quarter has seen a degrowth of 9.5%. So they're minus 9.5%. We are a minus 23.9%, so 24%. Professor Mehrotra, how is this different?
Well, it's vastly different for a very simple reason, because they put in place a fiscal stimulus. First. Second, they didn't have a lockdown as severe as ours. I think Oxford University has been doing a strictness of lockdown index for the last several months. And we, in our great bravery and our great audacity and our great wisdom, put in place not only a lockdown when we had only 692 cases. We now have declared 3.5 million plus cases, when in fact the reality is we probably have 35 million cases. But we put in place a lockdown which was the strictest of all in a country of 1.34 billion people. And we managed to kill 667 migrants who had to start walking back. I mean, there is a limit to incompetence. There is a limit to gross mismanagement.
That's what it is.
I was abroad. I came back on January 23rd because our meetings were terminated quickly and we were asked to come back because of the coronavirus. When I arrived at the international airport in Hyderabad, there was one scanner and nobody behind it. So I wrote a letter, sent an email to the minister concerned that you must impose a lockdown on passengers coming from abroad and a strict check. Nothing was done. People were coming and going. 7 lakh more people arrived before the lockdown was announced.
Yes. Yes, that is true.
Mohan, when did you come back? When did you arrive?
January 23rd. So that day, 22nd, we were asked to leave Bangkok and said because of an imminent lockdown, we better leave.
Well, we have Brinda Jagirdar joining us right now. Ms. Jagirdar, thank you so much. To introduce our audience to Ms. Jagirdar, she's a business economist with a specialization in macroeconomics, banking and finance, a very, very respected voice in the economy as well. I'm so happy to have her join us. Ms. Jagirdar, your first response on the number itself, 24%, let's round it off from 23.9% to 24, minus 24%. Did you expect it to be at this number? Our other panelists have said they actually believe the real number is far worse than what we're looking at. Do you agree with that estimate? And what do you think is going to happen now?
Faye, it's very difficult to put a number at this moment because the number collection itself, we are not able to collect the data itself. Everyone knew, of course, that it would be a negative, and 14-15% was, I was expecting around 20%, but this is really beyond what I was expecting. And it's really, I think it's not a surprise, because this is what the March-June period was the worst, and that is when we saw massive lockdown all across and complete shutdown in every sense of the term. So that is why I think it's quite this quarter has actually been written off. And some companies have even gone to SEBI and said, don't ask us to report first quarter results. Let us report quarter 1, quarter 2 together and give H1 results. So it's it's really a bad period. Everyone has gone through a lot of pain, and I think that is what the data is reflecting.
And do you believe, and this was going to be my question to the full panel, and I want you to please answer it. Now, we do know that, this is April, May, June numbers, and this was really, though, like you said, the worst of the lockdown. Since then, for better or for worse, for whatever reason, our lockdown has eased a great deal. Manufacturing has come back, and I believe in the next 15 days, almost everything will open up again. Do you believe then that the quarter following, which is July, August, September quarter, is going to be much better?
From here on, I definitely believe that from here on, the worst is behind us, and from here on, we would see sustained upward movement. But it is not going to be a sharp V-shaped upward movement. It's going to be a slow movement. It's going to be slow, painful, but definitely in the upward trajectory. Why do I say this? Look at the data put out by CMIE on the unemployment numbers. It was something like 30% in April, May, and they've brought it down to about 7-8% now, pre-COVID levels. So unemployment has declined. Then there's an India Resurgent Index, which is compiled by Nomura, and they have found that this number, which is about 45 in April, has actually moved to 70 plus now. So, there is some resurgence happening, some movement happening. And we also hear that there are some new industries, like, for example, the PPE kit industry, the mask, etc., which is something like 7,000 crore. I know it's a small number, but the point, and the farmers, FPOs, farmer producers organizations, they're also coming into the market. And a lot of things like which we don't know, only when the data are collected, we would know. So my own sense is that, and of course, let us look at this, like, for example, now Samsung has moved all its production from China to India. Then there's a German footwear company, I can't remember the name, but they are also shifting all their production into India. Apple started producing in India. Then we are producing wings for F-16 planes in India. Then there is, of course, BHEL and these companies have tied up with global companies for defense production in India. So slowly, these are things which are not going to show results overnight, but these are building blocks being put in place. So that is what gives me the optimism and the confidence to say that we will improve from here. But of course, it's going to be a long haul, maybe more than a year before we start seeing any positive signs. But actually, on the ground, things are happening, and I think we should give it time.
That's actually very well said. So, Ms. Jagirdar talked about unemployment numbers improving, especially in rural India. She talked about some production coming back as well, and some global companies that would move their businesses or their manufacturing facilities from China into India, and there's an opportunity there. And of course, manufacturing, creates a lot of jobs. Let me take this to the panel that, just for your information, Ms. Jagirdar disagreed with this outlook. They actually said it's going to get a lot worse. And if anyone wants to, rebut or put forward a different point of view, Professor Mehrotra?
It's interesting that Ms. Jagirdar spoke about very specific subsectors within the organized sector. So let's just put all this in perspective. No one is contesting the facts that she presented, but how does it add up? When you add it all up, it adds up to very little relative to a $2.8 trillion economy. What was a $2.8 trillion economy in 1920? So the question that I believe, Faye, you are asking is, when do we expect the 1920 GDP level in rupees, crores, or in dollars are we going to return to the 1920 level? Recovery does not mean that we are returning to the 1920 level. Point one. This is the second point. So the organized sector point was the first. The third point. Before Ms. Jagirdar came in, we were all in agreement in stating the following, that this 24% decline is not measuring the entire economy, because all that it's abstracting away from the unorganized sector, because the ECSO's ability to capture data about the unorganized sector was very limited in this quarter. Quite apart from that, most of the time, in any case, our quarterly projections are always based upon projecting how poorly the organized sector did compared to the unorganized sector, relative to the unorganized sector in that particular sector. It just projects by sector. And all this 24% is saying is, oh, the unorganized sector did about as well or badly as the organized sector, when in fact the unorganized sector did much worse. Point 4. If unemployment has come down from the April level, why should we be surprised?
Yes.
First of all, workers went back to rural areas, and there was a sharp increase in Manrega work that became available in May and June and in July. And already the government is not being able to meet the demand for Manrega work itself. 80 million person days were demanded in May and June, and only 62 million were provided. Point 1. Point 2. You've run through 58,000 crores worth of Manrega money of the 1 lakh crores allocated for the full budget year in 3 months. Are you going to increase the allocation for Manrega or not? Point 2. For still remaining on agriculture. Those who didn't get Manrega work had some work to do because they were cutting the Rabi crop. They went back for cutting the Rabi crop. Once the Rabi crop cutting was over, then the sowing of the Kharif crop had to happen.
Okay, so effectively,
unemployment there. So unemployment has fallen. Why are we surprised by that? But this is temporary. This is entirely temporary.
Right, so there's another question.
Like
so,
Mr.
Guruswamy, before you answer this, I want to add one more question to it. Nandini Ganigar says, doctors are unpaid in my city of Davnagere. If they cannot pay essential workers right now, how is Atmanirbhar possible? I just want to tie this into the larger point of states running out of money as well. We know state government employees have had to take pay cuts. Some of them have not been paid at all. This is still money that should have been spent that is not being spent. So do you see this as having an impact on the recovery that Ms. Jagirdar talked about?
Well, obviously going to have an impact on recovery. Even if number of rural jobs went up slightly, the wages have come down. If you're going to Narega, that is a much lower wage, daily wage. And I know in rural areas, for harvesting and for sowing operations, you could get labor for cheaper costs. So even if 20 million, 30 million were employed, it is at much lower wages. You've taken that money out of the economy. That's one point. The second point is, as far as government not having money, the central government has got to give money. What is the finance minister telling them? You go and borrow from the banks. Who will lend money to a state government? What is the credit worthiness of a state? The central government, and that is the money the central government is supposed to give them. The constitution, you're obliged to give it to them. You transfer that money, you go and beg and borrow. Nirmala Sitharaman should be doing that. Standing outside with the begging bowl and giving the money to the states. The states will not go and borrow any more money. Which bank is going to lend money to the states now? They're all hopped up to their necks. And you're playing this game of passing because there is no leadership, nobody knows what to say, what to do. And they treat it as an act of God. I hope that God arrives soon in the temple, so that we'll get some rescue of respect from this.
Right. Well, let me take that back to Ms. Jagirdar. Ms. Jagirdar, the point that both of the gentlemen made, and also you quoted CMI data. CMI has also put out a report that says 5 million salaried people lost their jobs in the month of July. I want to understand from you whether we see a V-shaped recovery or a hockey stick recovery, which is a slightly slower climb back up to where we were last year. Do you expect more salaried people to lose their jobs towards the end of this year if the festive season remains muted?
It's definitely not a V-shaped recovery. No way it is. It's going to be a long, painful road to recovery. But for sure, we are on that road. That's the limited point I want to make.
Ms. Jagirdar, one point I'd like to make. Apple iPhone production began last year before last, when the factory was taken over by Foxconn. Boeing wings, not wings, the ailerons made in Hyderabad started 3 years ago. Falcon Jet doors have started 2 years ago. It's not something we started because in the last 2 months because of Atmanirbhar. This Atmanirbhar has been going on for a long time. You suddenly added, the government suddenly says, is all this is happening now? It is not happening now. It had begun earlier.
So it's not something that's going to change now, but I just want to read out something else. Rushikesh has written in saying, I lost my business and I closed my restaurant. And simply anecdotally, drivers who would otherwise drive taxis, those businesses have shut down. People who would cook in restaurants, bartenders, waiters, people who would load trucks, people who would line up handbags in malls. A lot of these jobs have been lost. Now, in the longer road to recovery, what happens as more and more people lose their jobs? Is it going to get, is it going to need intervention of the government on a very, very large scale to make sure? Because when someone loses if someone was working as a driver at 20,000 or 25,000 rupees a month, and that person has lost his job or her job, it means that the family will stop spending. So they're going to stop buying Parle-G biscuit. They're going to stop, going out on a Sunday. They're going to maybe even squeeze on things like fees and electricity. What impact does that have on the larger economy if a large number of people start squeezing their household budgets?
It's interesting you talk about Parle-G, because I think Parle-G just reported that they've had the maximum of sales in a long while yet. I mean, that their sales have peaked. So that's so far as Parle-G is concerned. But yes, it is. People see, India, more than around 60% of the income is from the GDP is from the services sector. And the services sector has been very, very badly hit. Whether it's travel, entertainment, aviation, malls, I mean, all this has been hit very badly. So therefore, we are seeing this big impact on the economy. Certainly, it will take time. People will. I don't know whether they're going to lose jobs further, because slowly the manufacturing sector, the industries are reopening and coming back with standard SOPs. So, standard operating procedures. So, it's not fully opened, of course it is not, but slowly it is reopening. And there are some which are working at more than, say, 50-60% capacity industries. So, yes. I'm completely not saying that all is fine, everything is good, we are there. We are far, far away from it. And it is really, like I said, a long, painful road ahead of us. But then it's like it's there for any other country. It's not unique to India.
We are the worst among the countries of G20. The worst.
I'll give you a personal example, Faye. I'm a co-owner of a commercial building in Jagirdar. All our tenants, there's 3 banks there and Reliance Digital, all has suffered loss of business. And I'm talking about reduction of rent. Now, 2 restaurants have closed down and gone, leaving their equipment behind because they can't pay the old rents. Now, we have Agarwal Eye Hospital. They are reducing a drop of traffic because people are postponing surgeries and treatment.
Yes.
So what else is a better indicator? And I'm getting less money.
So I just want to qualify one more thing. Ms. Jagirdar talked about Parle-G. Now, Parle saw in the month of May a 5% increase in its total sales. 90% of that came from the sales of Parle-G. But according to Mayank Shah, the category head for Parle products, he said basically relief work. And you remember during COVID, there were a lot of NGOs distributing food to people who had lost jobs and to laborers who happened to be working. A lot of relief work uses Parle G biscuits as part of its food packets because it's easily packed, it doesn't go to waste, and it's cheap. So they've actually attributed that increase in sale to the fact that people had lost jobs. And so there was a great number of relief packets being handed out, and the biscuits were in that relief packet. But I want to ask a question that Nihal Fernandez has asked us. He says, thanks for doing such a great job with this panel. This is the kind of conversation we need to hear. It's true, it's nice to hear a conversation where everybody can finish their sentences. But he says, are any of our major banks or financial institutions at risk of failing? Is that a possibility? Anyone who wants to answer this question? Professor Mehrotra, you're smiling. Go ahead. I know you have something to say. Is there a risk?
Well, the point is that 60% of the stock of credit is with the public sector banks. And let's remember that the government is behind the public sector banks. But of the flow of credit pre-COVID, increasingly for more than 60% was in the hands of the private sector. People were giving up on the public sector, and the public sector banks were not even willing to lend. It seems that we are still a bit of way away from banks failing. When the last time the IDFC was risking being closed down, it was bought out by public sector undertakings. The good news is that banks are sitting a lot of liquidity. They are parking funds with the RBI. And there are many public sector undertakings, non-banking ones, which are sitting on reasonably large sums of money. And my expectation is, honestly, just slightly shifting away from the question, my expectation is that the government is going to ask these large public sector undertakings to actually undertake infrastructure investment and public investment themselves, because the government is simply not in a position to undertake public investment. And God knows that we definitely need more public investment. The central government never used to put in too much money into public investment. It's the state governments used to do so. So actually what the union government is likely to do is to abdicate altogether from the area of public investment and hand it over to the public sector undertakings.
What I find interesting here is we have a government that has actually spent 10% less than what it did pre-COVID. We have a government that has told state governments that, hey, we can't pay you what is rightfully yours as per law because we don't have the money. But they're refusing to scrap the Central Vista project, which is an inordinate amount of cash being spent on what can only be described as vanity at this point.
30,000 crores. 30,000.
Yes. And my last question to the panel, and this is really the clincher, Golf Kilo Aviation, you haven't given us your name. Should we liquidate all our fixed deposits and mutual funds and keep the money at hand? Is that advisable right now? Effectively, you're going to do the opposite of demonetization, just take all the cash out and keep it under your mattress. Is that the question you're asking? I want to expand the question a little bit to this. As a citizen of this country right now, should I be hanging on to my savings, whatever those savings may be, because I'm afraid at this point, at this rate, I might also lose my job in the future, or things might get worse. If I'm a business owner or an entrepreneur, I worry that things are going to get worse in the future. If I'm a salaried person, I'm going to worry that I lose my job. Now, the flip side of this is if I hold on to my savings and stop spending money, that's actually bad for the country, because the country needs us to all to spend our money in order to be able to keep this economy ticking. So I want to understand from the panel, do I do what is right for my family right now and save up all the money for what is obviously a rainy day around the corner? Or do I go out and spend money for the general good of this country? Ms. Jagirdar, do you want to answer that question first?
Sure. First of all, to your question, whether banks are at risk of failing and things like that, I think that's just fear mongering. There is absolutely no reason to go on that side. Second thing,
No, but ma'am, you were the economist of SBS, so great person to answer this question. This moratorium and small businesses unable to pay, interest is piling up. People are actually abandoning, like Mr. Guruswamy said, abandoning their offices because they just can't keep up anymore. I know a lot of young people in my age group who've shut their event management companies. They have shut their advertising companies and their digital companies, and they've let people go. Where will the bank recover that money from?
Face certain there will be some pain, like I said, no, there will be some, because they expect the NPA's problem is not going to go away. But that doesn't mean that the bank is going to shut down and you lose all your money, run away. So please don't create that kind of a scenario. Definitely, the banks have already said, look at SBI, they're getting more and more deposits. They don't want it, but they're getting more and more stuff. So, and where will they put their money? You want to tell them to go and put it in gold, in real estate, in stock market. You want to make it more risky for them. You want to really go and let them lose everything. Let them keep their money where they think it is safe. If they think it is safe in banks, let them keep it there. If they think they will earn in the stock market, let them do it there, because stock markets have also given good returns and people have earned. But don't tell the ordinary investor to take out all as a pensioner or the retired person, anyone, to take out all his money and put in the stock market. No way. If they feel the bank is safe, let it be in the banks, because banks are safe. Right now, the returns are low. They're not getting it. I mean, the bank interest rates are really low now, because the Reserve Bank wants you. I agree that they've not given enough attention to depositors as a constituency. It's mostly the borrowers they're looking at. So, but at this time, where are you going to go and spend? Are you going to the mall? Are you going to eat out? Are you going to the movies? You can't do anything. Are you going to go and buy stuff? You can't right now. So your options for spending are also limited, and that's not where it's going to help in anything. So right now, keep your money, hold your liquidity, spend where you need to spend, and trust in the banks. It's not going anywhere.
Right. Gentlemen, do you want to respond to that, Mr. Guruswamy? What should I be doing with my money? Keep it in the bank? Keep it in a fixed deposit?
It all depends on how much of money you've got. If you have got little, let it be in the bank. And if you've got large deposits, then hedge your bets. There are other instruments you can go into good equity, go into bullion. The government has issued gold bullion bonds now. Today, I think, was the last day for one lot. And so, you can do all these things, spread these things out. I don't think we one bank. That is a very dangerous scenario, even if it's a government bank.
Right. Professor Mehrotra, what is your advice for citizens? Do I keep my money at home under the mattress? Do I keep it in the bank? Because, and also as far as equity is concerned, I want to remind the panel that the RBI governor himself made a statement last week saying he's expecting the stock market to crash, which is he said correct, but we've never heard the RBI governor ever make a statement about the stock market. That was new. And that actually made me nervous as a mutual fund investor.
You heard him, and then it dropped 900 points today.
Yes. Professor Mehrotra?
On the Shaktikant Das's statement, I just want to remind you that a few days back, about a week back, he had made the remark that the way the stock market is behaving is quite out of line with what is happening to the economy. So,
yes.
I think we all need to keep that in mind. But honestly, I don't want to improve upon what Brinda and Mohan have rightly suggested to our youngsters. Mohan, you wanted to come in.
One reason why stock markets are doing well is most of the stimulus money going towards a certain section of people. The growth in America now is evidence that the Trump stimulus has gone to the rich people.
Exactly. Exactly. But my last point, and I think we should close with this, is the following, that which is going back to the risk about banks closing down, shutting down. And I think I've been in webinars where many government people have been there, and I've heard government people recognize with a great deal of honesty that current NPA levels in the banking sector, which stand at somewhere between 8 and 9% of advances, will rise to at least 15%. In other words, they will roughly double My estimate is that they will actually increase further. But banks closing, 15%, we've already been there. We've been up to 19% in the early 2000s.
Mhm.
So I don't think there is a risk of banks closing. Thank you.
Right. I want to thank my panelists, and unless anyone wants to make another statement, Ms. Jagirdar, do you want to come in on anything?
No, I think it's fine. Just the last point that this was the financial
Please.
stability report which the Reserve Bank brought out, and where they said under the worst case scenario, the NPS would increase to about 14-15%. So the point is that right now the situation is so fluid, everything is open, we don't have the data, we don't have the means of collecting the data, and a lot of it is really speculation, guesswork, and whatever you believe in. So I will just leave it at that. I'm not contesting anything, but my view is that yes, we have seen the worst, which is behind us now. A lot of things are being put in place, but when you put a seed on the ground, it doesn't sprout overnight. It takes time. So it depends. So it's going to take time, definitely, but I definitely believe that we are on the road to recovery. It is long, it is painful, but there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Of course, there is life at the end of the tunnel. Every tunnel comes to an end. That's what a tunnel means. but when is the question we're talking about next quarter.
And how badly will we continue to manage the economy is the real issue.
And next quarter, I don't see this recovery taking place.
But the question that Ms. Jagirdar didn't get an opportunity to answer is this: that do you believe that, Madam, that the government will have to intervene in a very strong fashion, either by doing direct transfers or either by taking some sort of very strong economic stimulus in order to achieve the recovery that you have mentioned in your previous answers?
I think a lot of steps are already being taken towards recovery. Okay, like I said, this is going to take some time. Sorry, I lost you said something at the beginning. Okay, next quarter. Definitely, no, I'm not saying we're going to see recovery in the next quarter. Excuse me. Sorry. We are not going to see recovery in the next quarter or the quarter after that, or even the quarter after that. I think March 21 also we will see negative growth. So it's only thereafter that we would see some improvement in the data, but the work has already been started. It has been put into place. So I will leave it at that.
I agree with that.
If you're not doing anything, that's
yes,
there.
You have to go up inevitably. Can't keep sinking like this forever.
Right. We have to recover at some point. I'm going to leave it here, but we will come back to the economy. I do believe that there are two very important offshoots, as offshoots of this conversation, two conversations we must have. We must have another conversation about jobs, especially for young people graduating from college. We've got so many messages, and we will do a conversation dedicated to you as to what should be done and what the reaction is going to be in various sectors. We're also going to do a couple of more conversations on mental health and depression and anxiety, because this is only going to lead to more of that. Remember, look at the family. Do not stress out to a point where you consider self-harm. We will find ways. You reach out to us. We'll put out our email IDs and details at the bottom of this video in which you can reach us if you are feeling distressed and anxious or depressed, and we'll put you in touch with people in your cities who can help you. As far as money is concerned, the group of people who are going to be most stressed out will be the senior citizens, who will see their interest income from their fixed deposit come down every time they renew it. Please consider the Senior Citizen Savings Scheme. It's available at SBI and other couple of banks and the post offices. It offers a slightly higher interest rate. You can go up to 15 lakhs, I think. And then after that, you consider your other options as well. Send us emails and send us, details on what you'd like us to talk about, and we will bring our panelists in who have been so generous with their time. Ms. Jagirdar, Professor Mehrotra, and Mr. Guruswamy, thank you again for spending time with us this evening. Hopefully, we will see that recovery begin soon, and hopefully we will see the government put in what should only be an emergency war room situation where someone is tackling the economy on a daily basis, communicating with citizens on a daily basis, communicating with industry on a daily basis, because we haven't seen that done so far. We're going to leave it now. Thank you for joining us. Good night and stay safe.